March 6, 1945, 3:47 p.m., Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye against the cracked periscope of his Panther tank. The lens fractured into a spiderweb of lines. He squinted through the distortion at an unfamiliar silhouette emerging from the rubble-strewn street. For years, he had memorized every American tank shape, the high-riding Shermans, the fragile Stewards, even the thickly armored jumbos that still couldn't pierce a Tiger's front plate beyond 500 meters. But what he saw now didn't match anything in his manuals. "Das ist kein Sherman," he whispered into the intercom. "That's not a Sherman." Through the fogged glass, he saw a long, heavy gun barrel, thicker than any American weapon, mounted on a low, sloped hull with a cast turret far larger than the Shermans he'd destroyed in France. Nothing fit the recognition charts in his memory. 18 seconds later, Hoffmann's crew would learn firsthand that the Americans had finally built a tank capable of killing a Panther from any range. The lesson had already been taught to another German tank minutes earlier, and none of its 5-man crew lived to report what had hit them. The M26 Pershing's 90mm gun fired at 853 meters per second, crossing the 120-meter gap before Hoffmann could blink. The shell smashed into the Panther's turret face, shattering 100mm of steel that had shrugged off countless Sherman rounds in Normandy. The projectile tore through the crew compartment and exploded, igniting ammunition and fuel. For the first time in years, German heavy armor had met an equal. Since 1942, German tankers had dominated the battlefield in machines that seemed untouchable. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at 2 kilometers. Its armor made it nearly invincible in frontal combat. German crews believed they were gods of steel. Allied tankers, terrified, reported seeing Tigers everywhere, even when none were present. The term Tiger fever became part of military slang. But while German crews painted victory rings on their gun barrels, 8,000 kilometers away, American engineers in Detroit were quietly building something to end their reign. Project T-26 had begun in 1942 with one mission: to create a tank that could shatter the myth of German invulnerability. The M for Sherman, reliable but underpowered, was never meant to face the Tigers and Panthers that appeared later in the war. By 1943, U.S. commanders knew they needed something entirely new. 14 major contractors, 300 subcontractors, and 50,000 workers joined the crash program. The Fisher Body Division of General Motors retooled its entire Grand Blanc plant in Michigan, abandoning Sherman production for a tank that weighed nearly twice as much. The heart of the new machine was its 90mm M3 gun, a weapon derived from America's high-altitude anti-aircraft guns. It could hurl a 24-pound armor-piercing shell at more than 2,800 feet per second, enough to punch through a Tiger's front plate at battle range. With tungsten-cored HFAP ammunition, it could penetrate 220mm of armor at 500 yards, enough to destroy even a King Tiger. The Pershing program was so secret that most factory workers believed they were assembling an improved Sherman. Each component was built in separate plants to prevent anyone from understanding the full design. When the first 20 M26s left for Europe in January 1945, they were listed as heavy maintenance equipment, shrouded under tarps and guarded by armed MPs. The tanks arrived in Antwerp on January 26 and were immediately transported to the 3rd Armored Division near Düren, Germany. Crews trained in secrecy, blending the Pershings among regular Sherman units. Orders were explicit: avoid combat unless facing German heavy tanks. The deception worked. German intelligence, once the envy of Europe, had no idea that the Americans now possessed a true heavy tank. When the first Pershing, nicknamed Fireball, was destroyed in combat on February 26 after an ambush by a Tiger, I was quickly recovered, repaired, and returned to the front. Within weeks, reports began filtering through German channels describing a new American tank with a longer gun and thicker armor. Commanders dismissed them as exaggerated. They would soon learn otherwise. At Cologne Cathedral Square, on March 6, 1945, the myth unraveled. Cameraman Jim Bates, from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, captured the entire engagement on film. German forces, including a Panther commanded by Wilhelm Bartelberth of Panzer Brigade 106, occupied defensive positions near the cathedral. When Bartelberth spotted an approaching tank with an unusually long gun, he assumed it was a modified Sherman and opened fire. His 75mm shell ricocheted off the Pershing's sloped armor in a burst of sparks. 3 seconds later, the Pershing's gunner, Corporal Clarence Smyer, fired back. The 90mm shell punched through the Panther's mantlet and ignited its ammunition. Flames erupted from the turret as the crew perished instantly. The footage of that duel, the Panther's destruction in front of Cologne Cathedral, became one of the most famous tank kills in history, marking the end of Germany's armored dominance. The psychological shock rippled through the Wehrmacht. Reports of an American tank capable of killing Panthers and Tigers at long range terrified German crews. They called it the long gun Sherman, refusing to believe the Americans had built an entirely new class of tank. Training manuals became obsolete overnight. Tactics designed to exploit superior range and armor no longer worked. The fear spread faster than the Pershings themselves. By mid-March, only 20 Pershings were operational in Europe, an insignificant number compared to thousands of Shermans, yet their presence created massive uncertainty. German tankers could no longer assume victory at long range. Every engagement carried the risk that the enemy tank wasn't a Sherman at all. Captured Pershing parts shocked German engineers. The cast turret was a single massive piece, something their factories couldn't replicate. The engine, a Ford GAF V8, produced 500 horsepower with remarkable reliability. The gun stabilizer allowed accurate fire on the move, something no German tank could do. The power traverse system rotated the turret a full circle in 15 seconds, giving American gunners faster reaction times. Even the interior design impressed them. Padded surfaces, electric lighting, wet ammunition storage to prevent explosions, comforts unthinkable in German tanks. As word spread, German morale deteriorated. The aura of invincibility that had sustained tank crews since 1942 was gone. Panthers and Tigers were now abandoned after minor breakdowns. Crews who once repaired their machines under fire now left them behind. Convinced survival was impossible against the mysterious new American tanks. By late March, the impact was visible across the Western Front. German armor units hesitated to engage. Commanders demanded confirmation that Pershings were not present before fighting, an impossible assurance. At Dessau and the Rhine crossings, American units faced minimal resistance as German tanks withdrew rather than risk facing unknown weapons. By April, the mighty Panzerwaffe was broken, not by sheer numbers, but by fear. Tank crews surrendered in droves, often arriving at American collection points before their infantry counterparts. U.S. interrogators noted a consistent theme. The moment they learned Americans had heavy tanks, the war seemed lost. Even crews who had never seen a Pershing firsthand spoke of its terrifying reputation. The irony was that the Pershing, for all its strengths, was not a perfect tank. Its transmission was unreliable, its armor thinner than the King Tigers, and its guns slower to reload than the German 88. On paper, it was roughly equal to the Panther, not vastly superior. But wars are fought by men, not machines, and morale often matters more than steel. The Pershing's true power lay in psychology. Only about 20 saw combat before Germany's surrender, yet they triggered mass desertions, reduced readiness, and widespread panic. German reports showed tank abandonments skyrocketed in sectors where Pershings were rumored to operate, even when none were present. The fear of facing one became deadlier than the tanks themselves. By the time the war ended, 310 Pershings had reached Europe, with 2,200 produced overall by October 1945. The Fisher body plant alone built 1,739, while Chrysler's Detroit arsenal produced 473 more. By comparison, Germany produced only 1,347 Tigers and 492 King Tigers throughout the entire war. The industrial contrast was staggering. America could build in weeks what took Germany months. For German tankers, this was the final realization that American democracy, not totalitarianism, had outproduced and out-engineered them. Post-war interrogations revealed the moral shock this caused. Veterans who once believed in their technological superiority now admitted that discovering American heavy tanks broke their will to fight. "If they can build tanks like this," one captured officer said, "then the war is over." Many who later visited Pershing tanks in American museums described the same feeling of disbelief. Side by side, a captured King Tiger and an M26 Pershing appear nearly equal in power. Yet the story they tell is far deeper. The King Tiger symbolized German engineering brilliance, strangled by industrial limits. The Pershing symbolized the moment American innovation and mass production merged, and the myth of German invincibility died. The Pershing's psychological victory far outweighed its kill count. It proved that industrial democracy could produce weapons as advanced as any dictatorships, and in numbers the enemy could never match. Its arrival didn't just change the battlefield, it changed the minds of the men who fought. In the final days of April 1945, as German tankers peered through their periscopes, they no longer saw invincible hunters, only prey. The long gun of the Pershing didn't just fire steel. It fired the final shot into the heart of German confidence. When those 90mm guns spoke, the legend of German armor fell silent. The M26 Pershing's true triumph was measured in destroyed tanks. It was measured in broken belief. It ended an era where German steel ruled the battlefield, and proved that the factories of Detroit, not the forges of Berlin, would define the future of mechanized war. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it.